We're going to sashay to the next speakers. So the next topic is focused on the changing face of cybersecurity in the workforce. And I want to welcome Jamie and Maryam. Just our next speakers are Jamie Ross from Deloitte and Maryam Jafari Lefty from Deloitte as well. So Jamie's a partner at Deloitte. I think we've worked together before ages ago.
Right.
You're focused on cyber risk practice in BC and specifically on risk advisory practice in Victoria. And you have more than 20 years experience with risk management, and his focus has always been on information to address complex scientific and business and policy issues. Jamie's work focuses in the field of privacy and security as they relate to protecting critical information assets and an emphasis on public sector entities. You've led lots of different initiatives in the BC Public Service, including the ability to organize and identify and protect assets. And we do call you when things happen, like major incidences. Jamie also represents Canada on Deloitte's Global Healthcare Cybersecurity Council. And you have a PhD in environmental science. I was surprised to see that. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much.
Maryam is a director in Deloitte's cyber risk practice. She currently oversees the delivery of a range of threat management services to Canadian organizations with a focus in the consumer and retail industries. During your tenure at Deloitte, Maryam played a key role in establishing and shaping the firm's global cyber threat intelligence center of excellence, its capabilities and products and services. She also serves in a range of roles combining strategy and technical leadership locally in Canada and globally. She has an extensive experience in cyber operations. She's managed security services, cyber products, and innovation. And she also currently serves as an innovation culture champion for Deloitte's risk advisory practice and co-leads the firm's Women in Cyber and Cyber Futures initiative. Maryam also has a PhD in comp sci and engineering. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm going to turn it over to you two.
Great. Thanks, Savannah. Thanks for the introduction, and sorry, everyone, to bore you with the details of our backgrounds, but appreciate the very kind intro. And you've really lucked out with a nerdy panel here, more time in school than probably anyone should spend. So anyway, we're really looking forward to the discussion. I'm just going to share my screen here. We have a few slides, not too many, just to kind of support the dialogue today. And so what we thought we'd do, we have about 25 minutes. We'll keep within the window. I think we've got 20 minutes left. We thought we'd just share, kind of following on that last panel, where I was very happy to see my good friend and former colleague, Jasmine, who I haven't seen in quite some time. But following on that panel that talked about how do people find a role in the cyber workforce, we're kind of flipping the question a bit to the other side, which is how are we dealing with the global / national cyber talent challenge that all of us on the line here are facing today. And I think the one thing we would say that we hope you take away from this is we don't really think about it as a one-size-fits-all problem. I think we used to as a group, and we've really started to get a bit more nuanced in the way we think about the challenge and the way we actually try and generate and identify and attract cyber talent. So we thought we'd kind of go through our thinking on that front with respect to different types of cyber personas that we typically have on our teams. I think I might just start with a bit of data on this problem. I think we all feel this pretty organically day to day, dealing with the challenge of getting enough cyber talent on our teams, keeping them engaged, keeping them in our organizations. It's truly a challenge that any cyber or IT professional kind of faces on a day to day basis. But how big is the problem really? And just a few statistics here. If you look at the size of the global cyber workforce, it has grown significantly over the course of the pandemic by almost 100%, to the point now that we're talking about 4.5 million professionals globally. So obviously, as we all know, a rapidly growing profession, and one that's rapidly evolving as well. So not only is the volume of roles growing, but the types of roles is changing very quickly. With that number of professionals globally, the forecasted gap in terms of available cyber resources is in the millions. Again, it's kind of hard to make that real for us here in Canada and here in BC. So if you take that down to Canada, some work that we had done a couple of years ago showed, and I think it's still true, that we're looking at a gap of about 25,000 unfilled cyber roles in the country at the moment. And that's on a total of 100 to 150 thousand professionals. 100 to 150,000 cyber professionals in the country. So we're looking at a pretty sizable gap in Canada. And then we look at the enrollment into cyber programs in the country, and we see it kind of in the 2 to 3, maybe 4,000 people per year. So I think what we're seeing is the 25,000 number is growing faster than we can fill it. And the number of people coming into the profession is clearly not enough to address that gap. So it's a bit of a systemic challenge, which is why we all probably feel the way we do in our cyber professions day to day. It's a crazy pace at the moment, especially when you consider what's happening in the world. So when we think about how to address that challenge, I think, those who have been in cyber for a long time, we used to think about a cyber professional as a cyber professional, 10, 15 years ago. I think we've since evolved our thinking a bit. I'd say 5 to 7 years ago, we started to think about people in the maybe the identify and protect side of the business, or identify and protect, the detect side, the recover and respond side, if you think of the NIST framework. So we'd break down professionals a bit into kind of operations and everything else. And the way we're thinking about it now is we actually break down the cyber workforce in a far more granular way. And we find that's helpful because each one of the roles that you see on the screen here, this comes from a study we did in 2019. Each one of these roles has people with different interests, different capabilities, different knowledge and skills. And from our perspective, and hopefully you would agree, you need all of these to really run an effective cyber program. So what do we mean by that? If you look at 4 examples from that list of roles here for a moment, you can see that each one has a different focus. The advisor, the hacker, the defender, the strategist. Each one day to day does different things and requires different capabilities, as you can see along the top there, in terms of the way they think, their technical skills, their problem solving capability, and then the knowledge and skills they bring to the role is quite different. And so if I look at myself, someone who grew up in kind of IT operations and moved into cyber over the last 20 years, I tend to come at it from more of a strategist perspective, linking the cyber programs that we develop and implement to real business challenges and fitting them within the business operations of an organization. You might look at someone who's working in cybersecurity operations as a very different set of skills, equally important, of course, because you can't have one without the other for a cyber program to be effective. So this is kind of the way we think about the different types of roles that we hire for and the different types of people that we're looking for to fill those roles. So I've kind of said a bit about where I come from in terms of a cyber strategist perspective. Maryam, I wonder if you want to share a bit about where you come from and how you've worked through these roles yourself.
Sure. So similar to what Jamie mentioned, for those of us who have been in the industry for many years, and for me, it's almost 2 decades now as well. Personally, I come from a technical background, did all of my degrees are in engineering, and correctly said in that previously, probably when we thought about cybersecurity, the focus was much more around the technical. I personally actually got into computer science because of my interest in cybersecurity specifically. And at the time, I was very specifically interested in intelligence and national defense, because that allowed me to use the various sort of strength as well as the aptitudes and interests that I had between politics, languages, intelligence, science, and then cyber, if you want to take it from there. So I have played pretty much all of the roles that you see on the screen here, minus the hacker, and a couple that was on the other side, including the scientist as well as the sleuth, or the spy, if you will. And what I would say about it is that diversity in terms of both skill sets applied and required, and the nature of roles that we can navigate through, is probably what drew me to cybersecurity to begin with. So my point on this one is that it has really allowed me to build a well-rounded professional experience. If I've gone from very tactical and technical roles to ones that were more strategic, but also that is one of the draws for the field. And I think we should be a bit more intentional in how we advertise that to essentially the pool of potential candidates, for them to know that not every time we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about coding or something very technical. We need to be a bit more, amplify that message a little bit more and provide these tangible personas that people can wrap their mind around as to what the future for them in this field may look like.
Great. And I'm just seeing a few questions come through, which we'll try and answer as we go here. I might kind of go away from the framing of the problem to the way we think about addressing the problem. And we think about it, obviously, in the, as Gary's mentioned here, in the posting stage, like we need 20 people to fill these roles. So we're going to put 20 postings on the internet. But we as a group, and I think cyber professionals nationally are thinking about not only, how do we get more students in university into these programs so there's more people to apply to those postings, but how do we actually get people more interested in this earlier in their schooling so that we have a much broader pool of talent to draw from who bring these different skills to the table for cyber from a cyber perspective. So if we think about the life cycle of identifying, attracting, and retaining talent, we thought we'd just go through each one of those here, share a few perspectives, and maybe take some questions as well. So maybe, Mary, I'll hand it over to you to talk about a few of these items here.
Sure. And again, I'll share just some insights and experiences based on what I've witnessed in the field as well. Some food for thought to leave with you. Now, in terms of when we're talking about growing the talent, and overall with really any of the elements that we have on the screen here, I think the challenge that I see is that over the years, the threat landscape and the technology landscape have evolved very rapidly. But the way we educate and what we do within our roles have not necessarily moved as fast. So the other day I was just thinking about it and I thought it's kind of like being in the eye of the hurricane where you have so much chaos going around you and moving at such a rapid pace. But at the core, I'm still having conversations around things that I was talking about 20 years ago around patching and vulnerability management in very similar fashions that I was doing then. Whereas there's a little bit of disconnection that is happening there. So one of the terms that we use at Deloitte here, and I love this, we talk about cyber everywhere. So now when we talk about cybersecurity and technology, it's permeating everything that we do in real life. And that should be the underlying premise of when we're thinking about educating, but also developing training and then retention and so on, development in the career. So for example, actually, as a part of the work I'm doing with Cyber Futures, we are looking at taking cyber education to younger age groups, because if we're waiting for folks to be in university, and in reality nowadays we're working to catch them when they're graduating. So it's way too late to try to develop that interest, that passion, and get that foundation solid. Sure, you can do it at any time, but better to start earlier. Looking at it, I still see that a lot of the initiatives that we have out there have the word code in them, or are a limited spectrum of talking about cyber safety, like talking about phishing and viruses and maybe some privacy elements here and there. So one of the things that I'm thinking about as well, and I think would be very useful, is actually take those elements and building blocks of the personas we talked about and think about educational programs at younger groups, starting with high school. Maybe we can embed some of these elements as part of the curriculum that students go through or kids go through, but that covers a broader spectrum of what you might do in cybersecurity. So for example, I focused on intelligence for many years. What sort of skill sets are required for intelligence, where it involves a lot of threat analysis, sort of intelligence from a defense perspective, so understanding the geopolitical factors, other economical factors, etc., which are very different. If you're playing the role of the sleuth, what you're digging up in terms of open source intelligence, again, very different from somebody who's administering tools. So think about varied education and diversifying the educational programs that we have. That's one. The other thing is thinking of it as also programs, whether they're bridging between, say, university and the workforce, or even when we have the new recruits come and join us, we need to structure the way we train candidates or practitioners, junior practitioners, on job-ready skills. Again, the university is still very academic, foundational, conceptual, which is great. But we need to start thinking about cyber education in much more sort of similar to what we might have in the trades, wherein there's apprenticeship programs that are a bit more focused, you can choose from, might focus on particular sort of slices of the problem, but then provide those job-ready technical and professional skill sets to hit the ground running. Do the same thing at the organization as well, because it's overwhelming, everything that we have to learn. So having sort of that structured package and putting those educational resources at the candidates' fingertips, make it easier for them to learn faster, to get to that value faster. Right now, it's a little bit diffused, and it's sort of, you go figure it out based on your interest. And I think that's great, but it just can be a little bit slower to realize. Jamie, any thoughts on that front? Questions?
A few, but there's a few questions that have come in. I thought I would just maybe pause and we can touch on them. The first one was where do we see a listing of these 25,000 open positions, which is a great question. You know, I would say a lot of these positions get filled without even getting to a posting because the market is so dynamic at the moment. And so I would expect you should see a number of positions, maybe not 25,000, but on the open job boards. And I would say the networks that we all have are the routes to the roles that kind of make the most sense for us usually. And so if I was to think about the number of organizations I work with right now, just in the province, there's over 100 cyber roles that are on their plans for the next year. And that, I'm just picking, say, 3 or 4, probably, 5 or 6 organizations. So there are plans within most organizations to significantly increase their cyber team complement. You'll see many of those online. I'd say as many of those are found through the network that we all create as professionals. So that's one. The other question, maybe I'll pass to you, Maryam, is there a minimum number of qualifications or certs we should look for when funding cybersecurity training projects? Did you want to take a stab at that? I have a few thoughts on that one as well.
Funding projects, as in if it's internally, so maybe I'll answer it this way. So I think right now we're getting to a point with cybersecurity that the baseline of what is common, that foundational level, you might say there's 1 or 2 certs that you might have, which is general cybersecurity foundations. If it's more senior, I think we talked about CISSP, but there are ones similar, but that are at a more junior level. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's just becoming the field is becoming so broad and diverse that we have to slice a little bit thinner. So my recommendation is sort of think in terms of buckets as to where that focus area might be. Because again, what somebody does in terms of threat management or detect and response is very different from privacy and data protection. Mm-hmm. So if we think about some of those foundational buckets and think about what is the core needed for each one, it's a little bit easier to direct and get folks to becoming more skilled and providing that value back a bit more quickly. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think clarifying the question or building on the question, the balance of experience and certifications, which I think is a great question. And I think Jasmine and Ian hit on it really well earlier. We certainly look for certifications. If you take 2 extremes for a moment, we'll have someone brand new out of school. They may have certifications, they may not. If I have someone with certifications, paired with someone who is an absolute dynamo in terms of their passion, their willingness to learn, the pre-work they've done, as was mentioned on that last call, setting up a telephony network and so on. That's the person I'm going to pick because we're going to get them certified anyway. So it's really the passion, the motivation, the drive, the interest. Those are the folks that are always going to be successful long term. So I would pick go with someone like that as having all the right foundations. On the training part, the only other thing I'd mention that we're having some success with is micro credentialing. So we're developing our own courses for our own practitioners and for the broader community around quickly emerging topics like cloud security within the different hyperscalers and so on. So very targeted, focused, enabling training that is not the boot camp, big exam, pass or fail kind of setup. And we find that is a bit more agile and helps people feel like they're training while doing, which can be really pretty invigorating too. Just seeing, okay, so that's it for questions. Do we want to maybe move on? I think we have maybe a couple more minutes here into some of the other elements of the life cycle, Maryam.
Yeah, sure. So maybe speak a little bit about some of what can be done within the organizations as well, within an organization to sort of get more value out of the resources that you do have. So a few ideas that are quite useful as well is, and it's interesting for me that we don't see more of them, is trying to, the same way that, again, we talked about cybersecurity is in everything now, thinking about diffusing cybersecurity knowledge and slices of responsibilities a little bit more and increasing that awareness a little bit more. And I'll give you an example. So I was just giving a presentation a couple of days ago to a group of senior marketing resources talking about first data collection and protection and what are some of the risks that they need to consider. And one of the things that was interesting after that presentation, a lot of folks came to me and said, we had no idea, because I was talking about the dark web and how data is used and sort of a range of risks around data and its exploitation. The challenge is that right now in organizations, when we talk about cybersecurity awareness or user awareness, is still talking about end user. So someone who's in marketing doesn't quite grasp a deep understanding of what cybersecurity considerations they should have for the role that they're performing. So if we were able to diffuse that knowledge a bit more, and by that I mean actually build in both knowledge requirements as well as sort of job requirements or role requirements around that within roles, that helps distribute the load a little bit. Of course, build the appropriate mechanisms around it. That's one thing. And then we avoid having the many meetings and here's the security people trying to stop us and be an impediment. That should go away once people understand why they're doing something, which currently doesn't exist. So that's one. And the other thing I would mention is as well rotation. Rotation within the organization. That's really beneficial, but also for certain specialized skill sets, like, again, I go back to my experience in intelligence, rotation programs that we were working on between, let's say, national defense organizations to the extent that us civilians could safely work in, and vice versa. So we go do 3 to 6 months there. The government, they do 3 to 6 months with industry. We found that being also very helpful in quickly amplifying the depth of skill sets as well, and retention and folks being excited about what they do.
Can I make one more point, Savannah, before we wrap up, that we found, and I'll keep it brief. If we think about retention, as Maryam was just saying, I think we've historically thought of, well, if we train everyone, they're going to stick around. And I think that's true to a point. Everyone wants to continue to learn and up their certifications and so on. We have been thinking for the last several years about training as one component. And then we think about it from an exposure, experience, and education point of view. So training is the education. Exposure and experience are the two things that you can't really pay for, you can't really define. It's dependent on each individual's interests. And so where we focus a lot of our energy, for what it's worth, is if we've got a younger person who's trying to spread their wings and get a bit more experience doing something a bit outside their comfort zone, that's an experience and level of exposure that they may not always have access to. And so what we try and do is early on when we're starting a project, say, what is the 2 or 3 things you want to take away professionally from this project, and how do we support you? So then we give this person the opportunity to, say, present to an ADM or a senior leadership committee of some sort, with all of us there to support. We prep them for it, and then they're kind of thrown into it to give it their best shot, and we debrief after. So the point there being that we think about retention as much about someone's personal and professional growth outside of technical skill. And we find that that's one way to make sure that we keep people really engaged. So we've really formalized the start of every project to really focus on what's in it for you and how do we help you progress. And I think, as Ian said on the last call, how do I help you take my job? Because that would be the best outcome for all of us, right? So anyway, so hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully this kind of nuanced or more kind of granular view of cyber professionals is helpful for folks on the line. We've certainly found it helpful for ourselves.
Thank you. I really like the varied personas that you presented. I had never considered the diversity that way, and I think personas are a fantastic way to demonstrate, the drivers and the motivations of the individuals, and for organizations to be able to tailor, whether it be their training, support, upskilling, coaching, whatever it is to support individuals based on their intrinsic motivators. I wish I could be a sleuth. I don't think that. But just presenting it that way made me really stop and think about the diversity of knowledge. And I think that the comment around looking beyond the traditional faculties and knowledge bases is something that I know I need to consider, and lots of others at the table need to consider. There are a couple of things I took away, the piece around it's everywhere, but also, building the literacy across those non-traditional roles, because it is about literacy depending on where you are, right? And diffusing the knowledge across an organization, and how you do that in a way that's supportive and engaging and is value-based versus, the typical ways that maybe we've presented it. So I just want to thank you for sharing that and the way you framed it. And thank you for coming, Jamie and Maryam. And I know we really appreciate this work that you're doing and, sharing your knowledge. So thank you.